back, everyone, to the Untaming Masculinity podcast. As always, I'm your host, Dan, and I am joined with my co-host, Brad.
What's up, guys? How you doing?
How's it going, Brad?
Can't complain. Life is good.
Life is good. Good. Everything been going good out in Utah?
You know it, man. We got some snow yesterday.
Oh, man.
Family's good. Oh, what?
I'm very much ready for spring. I don't know. I've been talking to a lot of people about this. I am done with cold and winter. I'm ready for warm weather and shorts and pools and beaches and all that good stuff. So
the older I get, I'm good with winter for 2 weeks, and then I'm done. I'm ready to move past it.
So today we got a pretty interesting topic for you guys. Brad and I have been talking a lot about excuses and why we make excuses, and just basically how we want to destroy them. Right? We've both spent the last 3 years kind of working on ourselves, and I'm not going to speak for you, but I would definitely say for myself that some of the biggest improvements I've seen are in the fact that I've learned how to eliminate or greatly reduce the excuses in my life. I'm curious if you've had a similar situation there.
Yeah, excuses have always, I think for most men, it's really easy to make an excuse for anything, whether it's your wife asking you to do the dishes and you forgot because you were playing Xbox, or you wanted to go to the gym this morning, but your clothes weren't laid out. So, I can't go get clothes out of the drawer. That's too much work. To having the optionality of selecting going out to eat at a healthy restaurant or freaking McDonald's. It's very easy to create these justifications or excuses to lack intentionality. And I've seen the same thing as I've started to say no to the bitch voice, as Andy Frisella says, and shun the excuses. I've seen a lot of growth in my life. Not to say I don't still succumb to many an excuse here or there, but it's greatly reduced. It's greatly impacted my life for the better.
And that's an important point, right? Like, with all of these podcasts, we try to come on and provide value and provide, some tips and directions on how to improve yourself. But I think it's important to point out that every once in a while that you and I are still fighting the good fight, and we are far from perfect.
Yeah.
So,
can I tell you a story about that today?
Sure.
I have been religious about going to the gym every weekday morning. My alarm goes off at 5:30. I get out of bed. I go. Last night, wife and I, she wanted to watch a Netflix show that I didn't love, but I watched it with her anyway because it's something that we're trying to do together, start watching shows. And we watched it. The last episode was like an hour and a half. And I got over. It was 10:45. And I sat there on my phone for 15 or 20 minutes. The next thing I know, I was like, oh crap, it's 11 o'clock. I've got to go to bed. Go to bed. Alarm goes off at 5:30. I'm like, all right, snoozing it. Snooze it for 20 minutes. Instead of getting up and going to the gym, do you know what I freaking did? Put my phone down, went back to bed for another hour and a half. I know. The excuse wasn't able to sleep in. I'm just getting over being sick. It'll be really good for recovery. Yada, yada, freaking yada. So here we are at 7:15 p.m. my time, and I'm not going to have an opportunity to work out today. Huge opportunity missed, all because I told myself in my sleep deprived stupor that I didn't need to work out today.
That sucks, man. I mean, but it kind of goes to our point that we all we're still guilty of making excuses. But I think let's start from the beginning, right? When we talk about excuses,
so
I'm big on definitions, right? So what is an excuse? To me, an excuse is saying you're going to do one thing and then finding a way or a reason, quote unquote reason, not to do it. or to go the easier route, or to go a route that is suboptimal, for however you want to put it. You kind of look at it the same way.
Yeah, I think that definition pretty much nails it. It's, I know that I should do X, but I'm going to do Y because it's easier or more convenient. But in order to save face to this ideal version of myself that I've built up in my head, or to others, I'm going to justify it or provide some sort of reasoning why I didn't do what I either committed to do or what I should be doing.
Yeah. And that definition kind of rolls into why we make excuses, right? We make excuses for a myriad of reasons. And to me, it comes down to one thing in the end, which is prioritization. But we make excuses for a lot of different reasons. We make excuses because we, quote unquote, ran out of time. We make excuses because it's too hard. I can't do that. So what other ones have you used in the past?
It's like I find myself saying the word "I just" a lot when I make excuses. I just thought this, or I just expected that. Um, it's almost as if it's some sort of justification to, I almost look at it as if you're trying to justify to yourself why you didn't do what you're supposed to.
Mm-hmm.
So this ideal sense, like this ideal person lives inside of each of us, like the ideal man that's in there, that Hercules, that Zeus, that Romulus, that whomever that ends up being. When you let that guy down, you almost want to have some sort of reason why you let that guy down. So you find yourself saying any number of things to try to justify or explain away why you didn't do what you're supposed to. But here's the thing that I think about a lot, and I kind of want to get your thoughts on this. When we make excuses to ourselves, we already know that we're doing something stupid. We already know that we should be doing more. So why do you think we continue to do it? Why is there this cyclical pattern of 40 years of our lives, or however long we've been alive, of this continual excuse cycle?
I think it comes down to one thing. Without an excuse, we have to accept the fact that we failed, because that's the only other possible explanation of what happened. I either have the excuse of I didn't have time, oh, my kids did this and I wasn't able to do that, or whatever it is, versus I failed. Excuse me, I failed to put processes and contingencies in place to make sure I accomplished the task or the job that I was supposed to do. And saying that and owning that failure is really tough for a lot of men. Failure has this negative connotation to it that a lot of guys are not willing to embrace. And when you get to the point where you can accept the fact that I tried to do something, I failed, and understand that that does not necessarily mean that you are a failure, just that you failed, and you can accept it and kind of do an after action report, or just review it in your mind and start going over the reasons why you failed and how you can improve in the future. Until you get to that point, the concept of failure is going to be a really difficult thing to grasp. So we make excuses.
Let me press you on that a little bit. I don't disagree. I think you've got it. But let's look at the man. There are many of these men who've told themselves for years, I need to eat healthy. I need to get in the gym.
Mm-hmm.
And they invariably don't do it because of that fear of failure. But a year, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years go by, And this same guy who is constantly telling himself, I need to get in the gym, but they're excuses, looks at himself in the mirror. He's 300 pounds. He's suffering from high blood pressure. He's pre-diabetic. Yet, why does he still make excuses? Like, yes, on a micro level, he is telling himself, I can't get started. But on a macro level, it's almost as if he's oblivious or too ashamed to do something about it.
Mhm.
So, I mean, what do you think about that?
I think that failure, or not owning failure, and creating excuses becomes easier over time. And it's one of those situations where if you say something enough times, it's almost like it becomes fact. It isn't fact, but it feels like it's fact. So if you're that overweight guy and you're saying, I can't work out because I'm out of shape, I have high blood pressure, I have bad knees, my back, this, that, or the other, you start to buy into your own bullshit. And all of a sudden, it's not an excuse, it's your new reality. And there needs to be something that happens to break you out of that routine, out of that vicious cycle. And we've talked about in the past, we've talked about the power of routine, and we've talked about um, how the concept of I'll find a way or make one. And both of those concepts can kind of come into play here, where you can help break that cycle of excuses. You have to understand that once you've made those excuses, it's a downward spiral almost, but you can break it. But it's also going to take a long time to get back out of that situation, right? That guy who's been out of shape for 10 years, he's not going to have a six pack in 6 weeks, right? But he can stop the degradation and start working his way out of the hole, you know, relatively quick. And that's the same with guys who, you know, go from job to job to job because of poor performance. That's the same with guys who go from relationship to relationship because they can't keep it in their pants, or they're too much of a nice guy, or whatever the reason is. If you stop looking at the excuses and start looking at the root cause and just own your shit, which is hard. Admittedly, that is very, very hard to do. But if you take a step back and you have the balls to kind of own yourself and say, okay, listen, these are excuses. This is reality and the reason why I'm in this situation. And this is what I need to do to start fixing my reality. That's when you start to move up and out of that problem.
Yeah, that
But it's a
resonates. That answers it. I mean, I've got a couple of real life examples. One physically and one with my marriage. And we talk a lot about the physical element. So I'm actually going to forego that one today and talk about
yeah.
kind of an example of excuses when it came to my marriage. We haven't spent a lot of time diving into some of my previous issues. We've alluded to it, but I was the quote unquote prototypical nice guy. And for those of you guys who know what a nice guy is, it's somebody who's not comfortable with who he is. So they try to pretend to be something that they're not. Most nice guys struggle with extreme dishonesty. I struggled mightily with extreme dishonesty, in particular in relation to things with my wife. It was in other areas as well. The idea was that because I wasn't comfortable enough with who I was, or that I didn't think I was good enough as a man, that I had to, for all intents and purposes, deceive her to think that I was something that I wasn't. The idea of my wife knowing who I was, absolutely mortifying. So I lied. I lied about big things. I lied about little things. Primarily, I lied about finances. I lied about where I was. There would be days I would take a day off from work. I wouldn't tell my wife. Go watch a movie. I'd go hang out. I'd go sit at the gym for a couple hours. I would buy things unbeknownst to her. I had credit cards open unbeknownst to her. And I went to a counselor. We went to therapy. I was told a lot of things. I read a lot of books. So I had all this foundational knowledge of what I needed to do, but I kept lying. And to me, every day I thought about this. As soon as I had realized what sort of situation I was in, I kept saying, okay, I need to stop lying. This is ridiculous. But I kept doing it. It didn't stop. It just kept happening. And there came a point where it was so ingrained in me that the idea of finding my way out of it scared me to no end. It became so unbearably uncomfortable because I didn't know how to go about doing it, that it provided this justification to stay in neutral. That excuse had become, well, this is who I am, and the idea of changing who I am is absolutely terrifying. What if I fail? Just like you talked about, it's this idea of failure that's absolutely catastrophically terrifying. So I didn't do it. I put it off. I put it off, and I put it off, and our marriage deteriorated worse and worse and worse. And I still couldn't get myself to a point where I said, enough is enough. I've got to do something different. And eventually it came to a situation where my marriage was on the ropes. She had mentioned the word divorce. She talked about what custody of our kids could look like. And that scared the shit out of me. That coincided with the time I joined the Iron Council. And I just decided I can't make these excuses anymore. I can't keep telling myself that the idea of doing something uncomfortable that I'm unfamiliar with is so petrifying that I'm going to avoid it at all costs. So eventually I started putting forth the effort because excuses were no longer an option. If I continue to make excuses, I was going to lose my marriage. I was going to lose my kids. So at that point, the excuses stopped because my back was to the wall and I realized I had no other choice. And I think that's what happens with a lot of guys. That story is somewhat similar to my realization when it came to my health. Is you're sitting and wallowing in self-destructive behavior, but that self-destructive behavior becomes almost a comfortable crutch. And the idea of getting out of it is so scary because you don't know if you can do it and that you're invariably going to fail, that the idea of lack of success and failure is so scary that you continue to justify and excuse away behavior that torments you every day.
So your story is really interesting because it brings up a strong point. You talked about how if you stayed on the same path and did nothing to improve yourself, and you bought your bullshit and you accepted your excuses as fact, your marriage would fail. But you were scared to try to implement the change because what if you failed? Well, guess what?
It's crazy, right?
The outcome's going to be the same.
Yep.
So you might as well try.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
And that is the crazy part of excuses, is that we get so ingrained in what we think is the reality or the fear of trying something new because we might fail, that we fail to realize that the outcome of both of those choices is the same. So if you tried to improve your marriage and you failed, or tried to improve yourself for the sake of your marriage and you failed, the outcome was still going to be that the marriage dissolved, you were looking at joint custody or whatever it was. But in that worst case outcome, where would you rather been? The guy who tried to save it, or the guy who lost it because he didn't do anything and didn't even try? Right? So we have to get over the fear of potential failure as well.
Yeah. I think one of the things that contributes to excuses and making them is this idea of catastrophizing. Have you ever heard that? I feel like you've heard that term before. I feel like you and I have talked about that.
Yeah.
So it's fairly self-explanatory. It's essentially envisioning the outcome and always assuming it's going to be worst case scenario. That if you're going to try something, it's always going to be a catastrophic disaster.
It's that old saying my dad used to say, right? Think of the worst thing that will happen, and it probably will. So we've
Yeah.
definitely talked about this before.
Yes, we have. And I think that that's why it's so easy for guys to make excuses, because in the back of your head, the worst thing that could potentially happen is going to be what's happening when you try to envision it. And the wild thing is, when you actually put yourself out there and you stop making the excuses, I have yet to see the worst case ever play out when I stopped making excuses and started doing the work.
No,
It's wild.
it doesn't necessarily mean the best case always happens,
Oh, no.
right? But it's usually closer to the best case than the worst case, at
Yeah.
least in my experience.
Yeah. There have been some things where I stopped putting off excuses and it was a disaster. It failed, but it was never,
Catastrophic.
yeah, it was never
Right.
catastrophe. It was never what you envision as the invariable outcome when you feel that your back is against the wall.
Yeah.
It's utter chaos. It never is that. So I guess one thing that we run into kind of moving along is there's this idea of, when it comes to making excuses, of, hey, I ran out of time. Oh, my day got so busy. I was going to go take care of that thing, or I was going to go work on the book that I'm writing, or I was going to go spend some time editing that podcast that we're putting together, or I was going to go to the gym, or I was going to go get my wife flowers. But I ran out of time. The day got really busy. We've all told ourselves that. So Dan is the master of organization, spreadsheets, coordination. What do you think about that?
Well, this was a topic that came up the other day with a mutual friend of ours, Ryan the Pirate. And he kind of called somebody out on it the other day. And he said, listen, he goes, stop with the bullshit of I ran out of time. You did not run out of time. You failed to prioritize. And I thought that saying was so simple but so elegant. It's very true. You didn't prioritize. You didn't run out of time. You knew exactly what you needed to do. And you either prioritized a task that may legitimately have been more important, or it was just something you wanted to do more because the task that you failed on was hard, was something you didn't want to do, whatever the reason was. But you didn't run out of time. Nobody runs out of time.
For as busy as I feel that I can be at times, I think one of the most humbling, eye-opening experiences of my life was adding the screen time widget on my iPhone to my home screen and seeing just how much time I waste regularly on my cell phone. When there's a day I look down and I see 7 hours on it, I'm not going to pretend like that hasn't happened, because it absolutely has. Makes me realize I pissed away 7 hours on my damn phone where I could have accomplished almost anything. It's ludicrous.
Yeah, and I'm gonna give Ryan another shout out here. It's even simpler. He challenged a bunch of us and said, just for a couple days, take a sheet of paper and break it up so that you're every 15 minutes or every half hour, whatever you want to break it into in intervals, write down what you're doing. Right? When you do that and take a look at how many times you're just screwing around on your phone, scrolling the gram, playing on Facebook, playing Wordle, watching a stupid TV game, whatever, a show, whatever it is, and not actually doing the stuff that you're supposed to be doing, it'll blow your mind. You need to prioritize the important tasks, and just by prioritizing them, you remove some of the room for excuses. Because it's really, you said it yourself, right? You hit snooze this morning, and then you kind of just cascaded into not going to the gym. So if you would just prioritize and say, listen, this is my wake up time, this is when I'm supposed to get up. I could use the excuse if I was up late last night, but I'm not gonna, because I have a priority in my life and this is what I'm going to do. So, and listen, I run to the same thing. We record this podcast we start at 9 o'clock Eastern at night. I get up at 4:30 during the weeks to go to the gym. Tomorrow morning, Friday mornings suck because I'm running on reduced amount of sleep, and it's very easy for me to say, fuck it, I'll catch up on Saturday. But that's making an excuse, you know?
Yep. And one of the things that this actually overlaps a little bit when we talked about routine. One of the things we talked about when we were going over creating a routine is do what you can to handle as much as you can as early as you can.
Yep.
One of the things about it's so much easier to push past the justification excuse bullshit that haunts us when we do what we can in the morning. Yeah, I admit I skipped out of the gym today. I made an excuse at 5:30 in the morning, but it's so much easier for me. I have so much higher a success rate getting up early to go to the gym than I do if let's just say I wanted to go to the gym at 7 p.m. Because if you try to go at 7 p.m., all the other shit that comes up in life, the errands you need to run and the stress that happened at work and the tummy ache because you ate too much dinner, all of that becomes that much easier to poison your mind, if you will, than if you just get out and do something early in the morning. There's a lot to be said for the miracle morning and the idea of accomplishing all those tasks, how much that can revolutionize your life just because you prioritize it first thing in the morning. So much easier to get rid of excuses when you do that.
It's funny how all these things we talk about kind of tie in together, right?
Yeah.
And you're 100% right. I've found that I am able to reduce the excuse amount significantly if I front load my priorities, not someone else's priorities that I have to execute, but my priorities. So my priorities are good nutrition, going to the gym, time with the family, getting in some reading every day, stuff like that. I do a lot of that in the morning before work so that the rest of the day I can deal with everyone else's bullshit and not have it infringe on my priorities and my responsibilities. So non-negotiables first, and we talked about this in the routines episode, but non-negotiables first, I get those done before my time gets consumed with other people's problems. And that's been a huge learning lesson for me on how to reduce the amount of excuses that are created and to be more productive.
Yeah, that nails it. And that's really what it's about is what can you do with intentionality to eliminate as much excuse making, I guess, as you can.
Yeah.
That's it. So, all right, let's just say there's a guy out there struggling with making excuses. And here's one thing we want to reiterate with you guys. Like Dan said earlier, we are not perfect. I'm not perfect. I don't have anything figured out in my life. It's okay.
But
Okay, very little. Some things. I've got a couple things put together, but there are still things that are very much difficult for me. So if you're sitting here thinking, I make these excuses, I'm out of shape, I'm overweight, I've got a bad job, dead end job, things aren't progressing. These things are okay because there's always room for growth and it's never too late. So let's look into and talk about some ways that you can start to remove these excuses from your life. What are some things you can do? So, Dan, what do you got?
I mean, the first thing you got to do is identify where you're failing, right? What are your goals and which ones are you succeeding on and which ones are you failing on? Once you identify those failure points, you have to identify the things you need to shed to get those things done, right? So the best way to describe that is what is impeding you from succeeding? You've got your excuses, and we always go back to the physical fitness part of it, but let's just say, oh, I don't have time to go to the gym with between the family and this, and you know, okay, do you have time in the morning? Well, yeah, I mean, I don't get up until 7:30 to go to work. Okay. What time do the kids go to bed? Oh, they go to bed around 9:30. Okay. You could be in bed by 10, you could be up by 5. That's 7 hours of sleep. And you could be at the gym and still be raring to go by the time you have to be at work, especially if you don't get up until 7:30 to go to work. So, find the areas where you're lying to yourself. Find the layers that you need to shed. Oh, well, that's tough to do to get up in the morning. Okay. Let's prep everything that you need the night before. Let's make sure that your workout clothes and your shoes are laid out, your pre-workouts already mixed and waiting on the counter. Whatever it is that you need to get going in the morning, make sure that stuff's all laid out. That reduces the amount of time it takes to get ready. Everything's there. You just get up, get dressed, go. And get in the truck or the car before you even think about quitting. Because I guarantee you that if you get to your vehicle and get in your vehicle and then allow yourself to think about quitting, you're already sitting there going, well, I'm dressed and I'm in the truck. I might as well drive to the gym. That's not to say that I haven't gotten out to the truck, sat down for a minute and gone, screw this, I'm going back to bed. I have to admit, I have definitely done that before. But it's 99 times out of 100, you're not going to do that. You've already gotten that far. You're going to keep going. So identify where you're failing and figure out the things you need to shed to get things done. What is in your life that is just causing you to fail consistently, causing these excuses? Does that make sense to you?
Absolutely. I think one thing that's very important is when you're identifying where you're failing, if you are really trying to dial in on things you need to shed from your life to get stuff done, be honest with yourself.
Yeah.
One of the things that it's very easy to do is to be in denial. And with excuses, there always comes justifications. You look in the mirror and you're like, I don't look too bad. You and your wife haven't had sex in a year and you're like, oh, my marriage isn't too bad. You look at your job, you haven't gotten a promotion in 3 years. Oh, my job's not too bad. You have had that book sitting on your nightstand for the last 6 months and you've read 4 pages. Oh, I'll get around to it. Be honest with yourself. If you can't be honest with yourself when it comes to any of this, you're not going to see any progress. And it's okay to be honest with yourself.
Yep.
Because nobody's watching. Nobody's going to judge you for what you are or aren't doing. I mean, yeah, you might, but at the same time, if you can be honest enough with yourself to realize, I don't have things figured out, but I want to get there, that is such a critical first step to help you start to identify where you're failing, identifying what you need to shed or change to start getting things done. And that's also going to ultimately help you start to prioritize and execute. Because once you realize, okay, I can be real with myself, I see what I've got to do. Now let's start putting the steps together to do something about it. That prioritization and execution step might not be easy at first, depending on what you're trying to do. Now, if you haven't had sex with your wife in a year, having that conversation is going to be really scary. Doing the things that you need to do that you know will help make you have a happy life, excuse me. I hate that saying. Is those aren't easy, but as you start to make a plan to do something about it, it becomes that much easier. From a prioritization perspective, okay, haven't had sex with my wife for a year. I know that I need to talk to her. What are the steps of what that conversation looks like? How are you going to approach it? Where is this conversation going to take place? How important is it? Does it need to happen in the morning? Does it need to happen at night? Is it good to happen right after she gets home from work? Is it good to happen before the kids wake up? Once you've made that prioritization, then it is up to you to actually execute upon it. Take those steps and realize that failure is not an option. Because as I talked about earlier, this idea of catastrophizing is mortifying, but it sure as hell beats the alternative of doing nothing and losing everything.
And I think the key in what you just said is the word prioritize. You are not, we as men are not going to be able to create a plan that gets us back into shape, fixes our marriage, gets us the promotion at work, and solves all our problems in our relationships with our kids all at once. You can start nibbling away at each one, but I would say that you need to prioritize which one you're going to attack first in a large fashion, and then have the others in smaller fashions, and almost like a debt snowball effect, where you really concentrate on one thing at a time and put a lot of effort in there. And once you've made a lot of progress there, then you can start to add more effort into different areas, but constant execution throughout.
Yeah. It's really easy to want to fix 100 things in your life. Like that sounds so appealing that you can fix all these things. But when you bite off more than you can chew, it's not going to work out.
No.
So you nailed it. You've got to pick the most important thing and go from there.
Right. And this leads right into the next tip is to go back and create a routine, right? If you regularly schedule the tasks required for the execution of your priorities and create a routine, that allows you to know what your non-negotiables are every day, and allows you to schedule that time every day to execute on them. It's to me, it's the simplest way of being able to reduce the excuse carousel and really start to make a large dent in what you deem to be the deficiencies in your life.
No, I mean, real life example, like if the way I started getting the gym was because I knew that I had to get up at 5:30 in the morning before my kids woke up, before I went to work, because that was my free time. It's the only time I had to do it. So I had to create a routine. And that routine started with get the alarm set, get the clothes set out, get the pre-workout there, get your gym bag ready, so that all you've got to do is wake up, get dressed, throw your contacts in, get out the door.
Yep.
That routine made it that much easier to actually begin to execute. When I started figuring stuff out with my wife and being honest, the routine was I'm going to come home from work, put my phone away, and then have a conversation with her, a difficult conversation at times about everything everything I did that day after the kids went to bed, like clockwork every day. It was hard, but because that routine was in place, I knew here's when I've got to do it. Now let's go execute.
And there's simplicity in that too. You know that every day there's a box you need to check to get you closer to that goal. And it reduces, when you start to chunk that big goal down into smaller pieces, it reduces your need to rely on excuses for not meeting that big goal, because that big goal is going to be a result of you hitting those little tasks on a daily basis. So this is where the power of routine kind of rolls into the no excuses part, destroying excuses, right? If you get that routine, you're now able to basically say, I don't have a reason to have an excuse for meeting that large goal. And the great thing is, if you use an excuse one day to not hit your tasks in your routine, but you don't allow that to propagate for the next week, the next month, the next year, you still don't have an excuse for meeting that goal. You've just created that excuse for one day, and you can say, okay, I'm going to put this one in a box and we start fresh, on the next task. Don't even wait till the next day. Just whatever the next task is that you've got to do, win the rest of the day. And then you start, don't let the excuses add up is basically what I'm getting at here.
And the magic thing about creating a routine? by having that, it makes it as easy as possible, the least amount of resistance to execute
Yeah.
on whatever you need to get done. And as you're lowering that barrier of entry, you're able to do it. Once you've been able to execute upon it, every time thereafter, it gets slightly easier. That hard thing that's been absolutely terrifying that you've made excuses for years, you do it once, you do it twice, you do it 3 times. Every single time you execute upon that, it gets slightly easier.
It reduces
Yes. Oh, go ahead.
it reduces the amount of mental capacity that you need to spend each day thinking about that end goal, right?
Yep.
Which
Yep.
the less mental capacity or the less thinking that you have to do on a daily basis to achieve your goal, the less you're going to come up with excuses. It's just something you need to do.
Yep.
And you do it. And like you said, the more you do it, the easier it gets to do it.
And yes, excuses will still happen. That's the world in which we live, the variability of the human condition or whatever. But here's the thing I'll tell you. Did I make it to the gym today? No. I guarantee you that there's a 100% chance I will be in the gym tomorrow morning.
Yep.
Unless I die in my sleep. It will happen. There's a snowball's chance in hell of me missing out on going to the gym tomorrow because I've created the routine. It's become easy. It's because I know that excuse is unacceptable. I look back and say, me not going, making that excuse was horseshit. That horseshit is not going to stop me from executing tomorrow.
Well, it's, and this is getting probably more into the power of routine conversation, but it gets to a point where not doing it is harder than doing it because I don't know about you, I'm sure you're the same, but it's if I don't do it, if I don't plan my day in the morning, if I don't spend time with the family, if I don't do my reading, I beat myself up over those things for the rest of the day because I made an excuse and didn't get my stuff done. I never feel bad or beat myself up over accomplishing the task because it was hard or because I didn't want to do it. I always feel better in the end about that. So it's a weird kind of dichotomy there.
And that's actually a really nice segue into the last point that we identified. And that is to do an AAR, an after action review. It's really important to spend the time and assess everything. Was I able to identify truly what I need to work on? After I identified that, what sort of action items was I able to determine that I needed to work on? Did I execute on that? Did I prioritize? Did I actually do it? And have I created a routine? If not, why? What happened? What got in the way? An after action review it's essentially a self-assessment. What did or didn't I do to be able to execute on that?
Mm-hmm.
What excuses got in my way? Where did I fail today? And as we've talked about, failure is not a bad thing. There's an opportunity for learning and growth from failure, as long as you don't allow that to repeat itself ad nauseum. If you failed today, okay, why? Be real, be honest with yourself. Make those adjustments so that when tomorrow comes, you'll win. Because that's the critical component is self-reflection, review, and enabling yourself to take that data that you've gathered from that review and that self-reflection to help you propel yourself forward.
The one thing I would add to the end of this before we sum it all up is that there's a difference between excuses and reasons. We've been talking a lot about excuses tonight. Excuses are you finding a reason why you didn't accomplish something, even though you should have been able to. Whereas a reason for not accomplishing something is life happened and something legitimately got in the way. So, for instance, if your time to work out is 5 o'clock right after work, and at 4:45 you get a call that your wife wrecked her car and is stranded on the side of the road somewhere, well, there's a reason why you can't work out now. You've got something bigger to take care of, right? That's a good reason. That's not an excuse. But at 4:45 going, oh, I had that burrito and that was too big at lunch and I don't feel good. That's an excuse, right? You can still get through the workout. You might be the guy in the gym farting while you squat, but you can get through the workout. But there's reasons in life, right? And don't beat yourself up over reasons, but know in your heart of hearts that you're going to know what that thing is. Is it an excuse or is it a reason?
Yeah. It's a really good example of that for reason versus excuse. One of our friends was doing 75 hard with us, and he listens to this. I think he'll be okay with us sharing the story as long as I don't say who it is. He got COVID while he was doing it, and it really messed him up. He thought he was going to be able to push through. He started shitting his pants while he was rucking to do his outdoor workout.
Yep.
Literally shitting his pants.
Not just once,
So
a couple times.
Wasn't it 3 times?
Yeah.
So he decided that it was in his best interest to stop doing 75 hard. You could look at that and say, okay, maybe that's an excuse. No, bullshit. That is a legitimate reason. He was not in a good place health-wise to continue on with something like that. And I was actually talking to him today, and he was talking about some of the lab work he'd had done and just the inflammation he'd had in his lungs that needed time to subside.
Yep.
That's a reason.
That's a reason. Exactly.
You know, at the end of the day, if you're making if there's a legitimate reason, or if you're making an excuse that you're trying to masquerade as a reason.
Right. It's a good way of saying it. All right. So just to wrap up, right? The five ways to remove excuses. Identify where you're failing. Determine the things you need to shed to get those things done, or the hurdles that you need to tear down to get those things done. Prioritize what you need to get done and execute those tasks. Turn those tasks into a routine. And finally, do an AAR and keep iterating the process so that you're constantly looking at what am I supposed to be doing? How do I accomplish that? And what's the routine that I can make to create that, to get that to happen? And the bonus one was, understand that in life there are reasons and there are excuses. And when you look yourself in the mirror at the end of the day, you're going to know the difference. And you've got to live with which one you chose. So.
Nail it. It's a good episode today, Dan. It's been a really good conversation.
Yeah, I like this conversation. It's a good topic. And I think you and I are pretty lockstep on this one. So we'll wrap this one up here. We want to thank everybody who's been listening so far. We've gotten a lot of good feedback so far. We really appreciate you guys taking the time to leave us a rating and review on your podcast player of choice. That definitely helps us get the word out. And by all means, please share this with your friends. I think that everyone can get a good amount out of this. You can find us at untamingmasculinity.com is the website. We've got links to all of our socials there. We've been pretty active on Instagram and not so much Twitter, but we're getting there. And Brad and I's personal Instagram accounts are there as well if you want to follow us and see what's going on in each one of our lives. So appreciate all your time. Brad, as always, man, it was a great conversation. And I look forward to next week.